Insulting religion. Time to prosecute? A video mocking the Prophet Mohammed has provoked outrage across the Muslim world. There have been demonstrations and violence, including against foreign embassies. Fanatics both in the West and in Muslim countries have used the film for their own aims. It was made in the United States, and many Muslims want the U.S. authorities to take action against the producers. Most Western countries have criticized the video, but have also called for an end to the violence. Free speech is an important principle for democracies, but where are the limits? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. From Tunisia to Indonesia, many Muslims have taken to the street to protest a movie, a film, a trailer that has emerged on YouTube. And the whole world is now discussing this movie and, in a sense, also suffering the consequences. To discuss this trailer and the consequences, I am joined by three individuals who have been following the story very closely. Welcome to Azim El-Difraoui, who is a political scientist at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Alexander Gerlach is the founder and executive editor of the magazine The European. He also holds a PhD in theology. And Nicholas Coolish, who is the Berlin bureau chief of the New York Times. Previously, he was a member of the editorial board of the New York Times and a correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Azim El-Difraoui, this movie, this trailer that has emerged on YouTube, many people are saying this is not really, that the outcry and the protests that have emerged in the aftermath, they're saying it's not really about this trailer. It's not really about religion per se, but about politics. Would you agree?
I would differentiate. I mean, obviously, like the movie, if we can call it a movie, is instrumentalized by political groups and for very diverse motives, you know. I mean, obviously, Iran is using every pretext to attack the West. The movie, in brackets again, which is not a high-quality movie, but really an insulting piece, is no major reason, for instance, for the Iranian protests. In Egypt, we have other reasons for protests. You know, some small Salafi groups, not even the mainstream Salafi groups, use the video to voice general discontent. And those people are joined by a dissatisfied youth, which is ready to riot for various reasons, mainly socioeconomic and general disgruntlement with the actual state of Egypt and their personal life. Libya, again, is a totally different story. We don't know whether Libya was really a planned attack against American interests by a jihadi group or even Al-Qaeda, which just then said, well, you know, the video is a good occasion to do so. So there are multiple reasons why people protest against this really insignificant film, which is insulting. But we really need to look from country to country into the set of reasons, despite the fact that obviously a lot of Muslims generally feel humiliated by the West, so they just need triggers to demonstrate.
And indeed, Nicholas Coolish, the protests are not one size fits all. Would you also agree that in the West, so-called Western media, we are very quick to talk about a Muslim outrage? You write for the New York Times. Would you subscribe to that?
Right. I mean, I think you saw even some joking on Twitter with the Muslim rage, you know, hashtag, where people were sort of saying kind of that you can't kind of claim that everybody feels the same way. But on the other hand, I mean, this video itself, whether it's being instrumentalized by different groups in different places, is provoking protests, often violent protests, all over the world. And I think that comes across to people in the United States, in Britain, even here in Germany, in an undifferentiated way. And it does appear, even if this is 0.1% of the Muslim world, it does appear as a sort of a concerted attack in a way, and that has repercussions politically at home.
And Alexander Gerlach, many people are saying that it's not really this trailer that is harmful to the image of Muslims worldwide, but the reaction to it.
I mean, first of all, there is polemics between Christians and the West and Muslim countries over the centuries. So we have the stereotypes, and on the other side there's also the stereotypes. So we see something which has occurred over time again and again, but today by mass media, by Twitter and Facebook and all that, really is like really right in the middle of our living room. And as you just pointed out, Nicholas, it's just 0.01% of world Muslims who would be on the street fighting that. So yeah, and what you just said, there has been also a Twitter post, if I remember that correctly, saying now they are outraged about a shitty film, but who is just helping the people in Syria? Why are they not on the streets for the people, for the good of the people of Syria?
And indeed, Asim El-Difraoui, it seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? I mean, the protests are playing into the hands of the makers of this trailer.
I would like to come back to the Web 2.0 and the global village. So today we have groups. I mean, this video was done by Egyptians, by really Egyptian, radical Christian Egyptian groups. And we have some form of asymmetrical warfare on the internet. I mean, it's really inciting to violence. So a minor Egyptian, totally, I wouldn't even call them crazy, but fanatic group wants to create global outrage and instability in Egypt, and it's enough to put one small video on the internet and we have global repercussions. This is something that wasn't imaginable before. I mean, over the centuries, there have been very, very negative comments in the West on Islam. Great European writers have criticized Islam. Dante put Mohammed into an inferno, like in the worst of kind of infernos. But we never had this immediate repercussions. So this video is really an example for creating violence and consciously creating violence in some kind of asymmetrical warfare with no means.
But would you say that the Muslim world in general, particularly those who took to the streets, have wasted a valuable opportunity here to prove the filmmakers wrong, in the sense that, hey, we're just going to ignore this?
Yeah, I think so. I really think so. But there are always interests behind. It's the mainstream Muslims don't react so violently to it, and that's the only reasonable reaction. But I would wish, I'm a Muslim myself, I would really wish for all of the Muslims just to ignore this kind of stuff, same as Christians do it. I mean, how many insulting movies have been done about Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. In fact, the U.S. satirical magazine, The Onion, posted a horribly pornographic and offensive picture of Moses, Jesus, Ganesha, and Buddha with the caption, "No one died when this picture was published." It's just a very simple commentary. And I think one has to ask the question, when and how and why do these protests happen? So, for instance, I believe an imam in Pakistan burns pages out of the Quran in order to try to get a Christian girl prosecuted and possibly executed, and nothing happens. There's no outrage. There's no rioting in the streets over what this man in Pakistan did. On the other hand, we were always told that certain protests like this were an outgrowth of the lack of political accountability, that if you live, say, in Egypt under a Hosni Mubarak, and then you have to sort of go to the streets when you're offended in other ways, but now you have a Muslim Brotherhood president. And so, these things are still being instrumentalized by these groups, and it's very selective when, the outrage begins. And I think that kind of tells you something about it not being a purely theological issue.
And Alexander, would you also say there is a naive thought on the part of the protesters who believe that the U.S. government, if it had wanted so, could have prevented this movie from being made?
I mean, this is an interesting point, because the political system in the West worked differently than, let's say, the political systems in the Arab world worked. And I think if you are from Egypt and you lived for almost 30 years under Hosni Mubarak and you knew how the country was run, you think it is run the same way in every other country. So this is why they say, why didn't Obama or whoever stop this movie? But the processes within our societies, they are different. So the president cannot stop the freedom of speech, because that is inherent to the constitutional rights. So, But in fact, I think this is the biggest difference from the Mohammed cartoons from Denmark in 2005, that the political stability or the political circumstances in the Middle East, Egypt and Syria and Lebanon, what we all know, we talk about, is different. So this is something where we have to pay attention to. But overall, you can say there is not an outrage or an upheaval in the Muslim world. As we just said, there's 0.01% of world Muslim population that is on the street, and you can't really create this as a clash of civilizations.
But I think you raised a very, very valid point. So people in the Middle East don't understand the tremendous freedom of speech you have in America, and where the principle is pushed much farther, for example, than in Europe. I mean, in Germany and France, we could prohibit the video because it really might incite to religious or racial hatred. So as more difficult as we in Europe, we could prohibit this kind of very violent speech, it's as more difficult for Arabs to understand that the Americans can't do that, and the total value of freedom of speech which you have in the United States, which is a little more limited in Europe. So it's a very difficult situation to comprehend for some people.
And in fact, there's huge outrage in the United States over the fact that the man who made this video was arrested. He was arrested in order to look into whether he was violating his parole and probation by doing certain things that he wasn't allowed to do. But it's viewed as a violation of America's sort of freedom of expression, which is a very important principle, and one where often I've met many Muslims who've moved to the United States and have been amazed at the freedom of religion that is encountered there, that you would never have a headscarf debate in the United States because, of course, everyone is allowed to practice their religion, be it Islam or Hinduism, as they please.
And I would like to follow up on this one. It's very interesting, for example, that a lot of very radical Muslim groups use the American freedom of speech, this legendary freedom of speech. For example, like jihadi groups host their websites in the United States because nobody can prohibit them. I mean, in Europe, these websites would be taken down straight away. But then again, the defenders of freedom of speech would say, oh, we tolerate this jihadi website because freedom of speech is such an absolute value.
Yeah, but there's also the other side of the coin. We had a writer at the European recently writing, well, don't insult my freedom of speech with your rubbish. I mean, it's meaning like that it's a precious good. And so not everything you can say is something you should say. So this is also what we, I think, in the West have also to maintain or to keep up what are taboos, what is not decent to talk about. I mean, the Onion drawing you referred to showed these religious figures in kind of intercourse kind of scenes, and of course, I mean, I saw that and I thought, well, it's like it's provocative, so that's it. So we learned to deal with these kind of cartoons. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if you need that to prove your point that we have the freedom of speech. We have also the freedom to be silent at one point.
But you are the founder and executive editor of a magazine called The European, which started initially as an online magazine, mainly to distribute a variety of opinion.
Yeah.
Now, would you say there are no limits to freedom of speech?
Oh, I mean, yes. I mean, the European emerged as a magazine in Europe, as a zone, as an area, as a continent where we believe in the freedom of speech, and from the freedom of speech and opinion derives the freedom of press, the freedom of science, the freedom of religion. And I think this is something what we are very inclined to at the European. And we don't have these kind of drawings, but we have opinions. Let's say in the circumcision debate, we had a scholar who holds several PhDs and stuff, and he would just have very controversial thoughts on circumcision of Muslim men, and it was like many of our readers really opposed him, but that's what the debate is about.
Asim al-Difrawi, there are many who are now saying YouTube should take this trailer off the internet. What would you say?
I mean, it's a very complicated issue. I would agree that YouTube should take this trailer off the internet, but I also can understand this American standpoint. We're talking about this absolute freedom of speech, which is really on the basis of American society.
But it's not just the American society per se. I mean, this whole debate is currently going on in Germany as well.
No, I mean, okay, now Germany, I think Germany have found after horrible slander, libel, disinformation, which led finally to the rise of Nazism, to instability in the Weimar Republic. Germany has very, very good press laws, which try to find this balance between libel, slander, disinformation, and freedom of speech, and inciting to racial hatred. Interesting enough, that's exactly the debate we are facing today in Egypt and Tunisia. They're discovering themselves where are the limits of freedom of speech, and this is not necessarily related to Mohammed videos or so on. In Egypt, there's a very powerful debate going on about when do I do slander, when do I start insulting a president, when do I give misinformation, how can we persecute these people who consciously give disinformation or start disinformation campaigns. So all is also related to this new situation in the Arab transition period, where people ask themselves, now we can speak freely, but where shall we put the limit? And this is not only a matter of religious issues.
Nicholas Coolish, the U.S. was obviously the main target of these protests. How are these protests being perceived in the U.S.? And I know presidential candidate Romney tried to seize upon this. He has bigger problems now. But would you say this plays into the U.S. presidential race as well?
It does, but it's a little bit unpredictable. President Obama is viewed as I think a cooler head, or perhaps more experienced when it comes to foreign policy. But on the other hand, he also supported the Arab Spring, and if enough U.S. embassies are attacked, if enough U.S. interests are attacked, then it'll begin to appear as though he made a major miscalculation and should have hewed to the realpolitik of supporting stable dictators in the region. And I think, when you look kind of at the reaction to this, I feel as though too much of it is either these people are bad, or it's not our fault, the 0.1% argument. And I think that at the same time, that this could be or is or was an opportunity for people in the Muslim world who advocate more moderation and more freedom of speech to stand up and to defend these principles. But I think there's a certain shying away and allowing the mob to steal the voice.
We're speaking about YouTube. That's not a point at all, because I think it was Times or Newsweek who tried to find around the Cairo protests someone who had seen the trailer. So I think the trailer is on YouTube, but most of the protesters haven't even seen it. And another thing to what you said, where is the limit of freedom of speech? It's very interesting. I myself brought the term of taboo up. You ask about the debate magazine. At this very point where you can debate about something publicly, on a decent level, of maybe a scientific or a scholarly level, something cannot be a taboo anymore because it is debated publicly. When I was for the first time in the United States in 1995, it was around the time of the Simpson trial, and I visited with a friend who had family there in Minnesota, and he said, there's two things you do not bring up at the table. You don't talk about race, you do not talk about homosexuals, whatever regard. So there were taboos also in the American context where I think today, where you talk about same-sex marriage, for instance, it is not a taboo anymore because it is in the press all the time and it's debated.
I think the philosophical or even linguistic definition of taboo is obviously very important. What we don't really understand in Europe is that already a depiction of the Prophet, is deep-rooted taboo. It's not just an interdiction. It's really the profound feeling that you can't do that. And in this way, I find obviously all these cartoons of Muhammad quite disrespectful, because we have our own taboos. We are seeing like a British princess shown by a photographer. We see her nude breasts, and this really shocks British society. And today it's a new taboo that you don't intrude on the privacy of the British royal family too much. It's really profound British taboos. So taboos have historical evolutions. So in some ways, if we would do responsible information or responsible journalism, we should really find out where are the taboos of the others. Interestingly enough, there is freedom of speech in the United States, which is somehow an absolute value. But then again, if a singer goes into public with nearly bare breasts, this would be considered as so extremely shocking because it hits an American taboo. So, I mean, like in this globalized society, we just should show some sensitivity, not total respect, but some sensitivity just for mutual, or not mutual, but for the taboos of others.
But I think that when Janet Jackson is half naked on television, nobody sets anything on fire. The French embassy has not been attacked because Kate Middleton, the princess, was photographed there in France. And the embassies I think are a significant point as well because Libya might be an exception because it's pretty chaotic, and of course Benghazi, is a different case. But when an embassy is attacked and is breached, that's a political act as well, because you can send enough people there to protect an embassy, and so it's really kind of maybe that means that the Egyptian government is unprepared, or maybe it means the Egyptian government wouldn't think that. And so I think there's a certain learning curve here for Morsi and for the new government there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But I mean, to go back to the freedom of speech, I mean, I think that everything offends someone. And so the American Civil Liberties Union, for example, is constantly defending neo-Nazis who are deplored by almost the entire spectrum in America. But they stand up for them because it's the speech that we abhor, that is first limited, and then suddenly it's your speech.
Yeah, I mean, and this all comes back to identity. I mean, this is very inherent to the identity of the United States. The freedom of speech thing is very inherent to our European DNA. On the other hand,
but differently.
Of course, it's different. But what you said about the taboo in the Muslim world about not showing a picture of Muhammad is also. It gives, maybe you didn't mean it, but it's like it gives the illusion as if there would be like one and only perception of this matter. I mean, we also know there is an atheist tradition in Islam. Actually, in the early days of Islam, when Muhammad lived and when his teaching emerged, there were like the let's say the followers of the old religions or whatever. They would just like there were also atheist kind of tendencies. So there has been a constant, so to speak, also inherent in Islam and in the Muslim countries, controversy about religion. And one could now state, if you compare Kate Middleton to Jesus Christ, you can prove that Kate Middleton is a living person, and you cannot about Jesus. So
I'm not saying you shouldn't break taboos. I think you should be just conscious about it and a little sensitive about it. I mean, I think it's really. I have no respect, for instance, for this French magazine, which yesterday was again showing some Mohammed whatever drawings, which were quite disrespectful, only to sell. Okay. And not taking into account the political situation, and not taking account that this might upset, like the Muslim population is a very weak population in the sense that they are socioeconomically weak. Most Muslims have very little revenues, very little education, feel for a long time that they have been treated disrespectfully by Western powers. And if you just put oil on fire for commercial reasons, I mean, this minor French magazine, which used to be a left-wing magazine, publishes cartoons just in order to sell. And causes major, so it's just a lack of sensitivity for not very valid reasons. I mean, they're not defending freedom of speech here. They're just trying to sell some copies, and that's why I'm saying, let's be a little sensitive about the taboos of other cultures. And they're not an absolute value, obviously not.
Well, actually, this is very interesting because this is a very parallel to the Denmark case in 2005. It's not actually. It came to the Muslim world by some visitors from the Muslim world who took the Danish cartoons to the Arab world. Before that, they were not known there. So there was like a few months between, I guess, October and February. So there is, if you show cartoons like that in Denmark or in France, it is first of all the Danish Muslim population or the French Muslim population to you address. And I think this is something which is not related to Pakistan or Iraq, but how do you treat your minorities in your country? And this is something where in Denmark, for instance, 2005, there was a right-wing kind of government that had already made some steps towards the Muslim minority in many ways. And this is something what you have to keep in mind. We talk about people living here in this hemisphere, in our countries, and we have, if you show these cartoons, it's first of all disrespect for the people living next door to you.
And I would like to follow up on this one. The French example is crucial, because there we see something produced in Europe and which is instrumentalized in Europe. So the mainstream French Muslims don't really care about this. They're used to this by now, and they have a certain distance to it. They just criticize it. But what's happening there is like extreme Salafis try to use it to get maximum of attention in France, makes their cause even more known. And then there are popular right-wing politicians, mainstream right-wing politicians, who defend this issue to gain sympathies. The ex-French prime minister, who is going to run the major right-wing party in France, just defended these cartoons in order to gain popular votes by a huge number of French which are not very happy with Islam in France. So here we have a very concrete European example how something is used in totally unrelated manners.
And Nicholas Kulish, we have seen in Russia, for instance, we've seen the Pussy Riot trial, where Pussy Riot was sentenced to time in jail due to blasphemy. So is this, if we were supposed to take into account taboos and so on and so forth, as we just said, and sensitivities, the case of Russia, Pussy Riot, you can also see that it can be politically abused. Isn't that the case?
Well, I mean, I think that it's purely political, and I mean, I don't think anyone thinks, or very few people I can imagine think that it was Putin's religious sensibility that was offended that caused him to put those women in jail. But I mean, you know, I think that we've reached a point where no government, no country is going to be able to control these kinds of images. I could draw something offensive right now and have it up on the internet, you know, within a few seconds. And so I think there's really a question. We in Europe, in some ways, are beside the point. I was in Egypt for the revolution, and the revolution was about, or was meant to be about, a better life for the people there. However you choose to define that. And you know, right now, you know, the Egyptian economy is doing even worse. People have even less. Burning Western embassies is going to discourage investment in those places. And I think that Arab and Muslim societies, plural, have to ask themselves, you know, how do we want to live going forward in a world where, you know, a boy in Alaska or, you know, a woman in Thailand can offend our sensibilities via the internet whenever they want, but how do we want to live?
And since you mentioned the revolution, there was a very romantic notion, if you will, over the Arab Spring in the West less than 2 years ago. Do you feel that there is a sense of disappointment that the revolution perhaps has even backfired?
Well, I mean, I think that for people in the West, that there is an extreme sense of maybe this was a mistake, and that's a very unfortunate and dangerous notion, because then you're saying we should go back to the model of supporting, you know, oppressive dictatorships. But that's, I mean, it is a natural impulse. When there's enough chaos and fire and fighting in the streets, people suddenly yearn for order.
Yeah, you just brought up the question of blasphemy and how to deal with it. We had a well-known German writer a few months ago who would just say we should strengthen the paragraph against blasphemy, which we still have in our law, to prevent such situations as we now have. And we mostly portray us as the secular West and those kind of religious people somewhere else. But we have in the States and Germany, there are several constitutions that invoke the respect of God as a principle of the Constitution. In the national Constitution, we have the responsibility of man towards God. So just to have a brief example that also we here in the West have still a religious tradition we implement and include in our secular discourse. However, what you just said about context and the video, let's say in YouTube, or the cartoons we spoke about, they are outrageous and they were meant to provoke. But remember in 2006 when the Pope was in Germany and gave a speech in Regensburg, However, he should have considered his role now not as a professor anymore, but of the leader of a worldwide religion. He, however, spoke in the context of university and gave a speech, and he quoted something which was taken and perceived, I guess, in another way than he meant it originally. And then the Pope was side by side with many left-wing European intellectuals saying, "Oh, it was just like giving a lecture." And but he was in this lecture, and he used a quote, and he was not meant to insult all the Muslims. However, he should have treated been differently, because he's also a political figure. But just to give another example, which is not as provocative as the cartoons now in France, there was like the huge or the same debate on the Regensburg speech of the Pope.
Yeah, I would like to come back to illusions about the Arab revolutions or the transformation process. I think this is also a lot of people might be disillusioned because we don't know enough about the Arab world. I mean, like the analysts were from beginning on saying this is a unique historical chance, but it's going to be horribly difficult. We'll have major setbacks. There will be continuous violence, but we shouldn't miss this chance, and that's what I believe today. So there's no means of going back anyway, but we just should make everybody all the time aware that these transformations take decades, same as it took in Europe. I mean, from the French Revolution to German contemporary democracy, what happened to world wars, several other wars, how many million dead. So we should be honest and talk about this. Then again, talking about an insulting video, we should also confront Muslims with the insulting stuff they do themselves. I mean, especially some of these radical groups, especially Libya, jihadis attacking the American interests there. What did the jihadis do in terms of videos? Execution videos of American, Japanese, you name it, hostages in Iraq, which are totally illicit, not legitimate, even to Islamic standards. You don't execute somebody in front of a camera and put it on YouTube. So we should also really engage radical Muslim, jihadi, Salafi groups, you name it, and tell them, look what you did, and all this is not admissible. You want us to respect you, so respect us as well, and respect your own religion. I mean, in terms of Islam, if you talk about taboos, you're not meant to show this kind of images. For instance, jihadis depicting paradise, is something total taboo for normal Muslims. So we should really engage also these people and say, well, you might be upset about this video, but look at your own stuff and behave responsible as well.
And I think it's worth bringing up, our ambassador to Libya and sort of saying that you can see how radical elements on all sides are benefiting when the kinds of, America is a country that's done many bad things and that's done many good things. But when you look at someone who's in the Peace Corps, who's teaching English in the Atlas Mountains, who's devoted his entire life to the Middle East and indeed has a special bond with Libya, when you kill that kind of person, you empower the radicals in the United States who want to say we should disengage from these countries, and you help cut off your own country, Libya, from groups that might be trying to help but also influence the country in another direction.
But that's exactly the point. I mean, what these radicals are trying to do on both sides, is taking moderates as hostages. I mean, there's Copts inflaming Muslim Salafis in Egypt, Egyptian Copts, provoking Salafis in Egypt to create instability. That's exactly their aim, and they're taking the moderate, whatever Egyptian, Libyan youth, which dreams of their revolution, of dreams of a better life, as hostages, and just trying totally to polarize society. I mean, we had this before. Obama was trying to get out of it. I mean, we had Osama bin Laden and the war on terror, which already polarized, and now there are new groups, extremes on both sides, who try to polarize the world and just create conflict and instability to pursue their own interests. And
well, if you talk about this, then we have to speak about the negative abilities or capabilities of religion itself. I mean, this is like we in the West, we see Christianity as a charitable religion, and there is maybe once in a while a service, but it has lost its political grasp, and we are actually quite happy about this. However, on each end of the two sides you just described, if it was George W. Bush and Ahmadinejad in Iran, where we read lots of pieces in papers or saw documentaries where those both were described as people who are very much obsessed maybe by their view of the world and their idea of the end of the world and this final Armageddon and there's the good and there's the evil and there's even an axis of evil. So there comes like all these apocalyptical kind of religious ideas which can drive people mad regardless what religion they have.
And it should be noted perhaps that, of course, Muslims don't hold the monopoly in feeling insulted when it comes to religious sensibilities. Klar. We remember the outcry over the MTV show Pope Town, Klar. For instance, or when Madonna wears a cross on stage.
Crucified, like that.
Crucified, those sort of things. But at the end of the day, do you believe that religion then should be off limits when it comes to satire, for instance, or?
No, of course not. I mean, what there's a fine line between religion as a very part of identity of people, and religion as a matter of the public sphere, and this creates a lot of most of the time not definable kind of I say that attention for people related. It's not that you really insult some dogma. It's just you insult a part of me, and this is something that is really gets all your self-defense mechanisms going. And I think this is what you just said in the beginning. It's not about religion per se. We always talk about identity. There is 50 million Catholics or Protestants in this country. So there's just like 5 to 6 million going to church. So what they would just say it's part of their identity to be Christian of this or that denomination.
If we start prohibiting, things that are offensive to religions, are we going to go back to a sort of a pre-Enlightenment moment? Are we going to ban all the works of Voltaire? Are we going to ban Dante's Inferno? This is an excellent point. I think that we, not to be too American about it, but I think that these are principles that we have to defend, or we quickly slide back to that point. And I think you can have protests. You can have demonstrations. Nobody thinks that if the Prophet Mohammed's image is instrumentalized and abused, that people shouldn't even march in the streets and say that they're offended. It's that moment when you switch over into violence. Madonna was never attacked over her videos.
And indeed, Asim El-Difraoui, does the Muslim world still have to learn how to react to these things?
Sure. I think they really have to learn how to react to having heard all this thing, having said what we said, I think the Muslim world needs to understand that there are forms of non-violent protest. There's no reason to kill somebody about a stupid cartoon or an interesting cartoon or a critical cartoon. And there's a learning process. I mean, even Salafi parties in Egypt called for peaceful protests. They said, we're not happy with the film, we're not happy with the videos, go and demonstrate, but demonstrate peacefully. So there's some people, even radicals I don't personally appreciate very much, who are going towards really democratic form of protest. And this is quite encouraging. We should encourage them more. And last remark, this French magazine who yesterday again published these cartoons. Well, I'm not denying them their right to publish these cartoons, but I think it's really totally insensitive to publish them in the moment where we already have had deaths, horrible deaths in the Arab world, and just don't put too much oil on the fire. I mean, and that's all.
And we talk so loosely about globalism per se, but in this case, truly a cartoon published in a Danish local newspaper, or in this case a French newspaper, can have global repercussions.
Yeah, I think that it can, but that is a sense of kind of what is your community and what is your sort of sphere. I mean, I think that often when people are offended in the United States, it's about what is within our own government's purview, how are politicians reacting to it. So it's how does this affect me and what can I do about it? But this sort of this disembodied outrage over things happening anywhere. I mean, it's one thing if somebody is walking down the streets in a neighborhood in Cairo holding up an offensive image versus if someone somewhere, anywhere is doing something that can be found on the internet. And I think that those are lines that people maybe will have to learn to respect at some point.
And Alexander Gerlach, the reaction shown on the part of a few Muslims anyway to this trailer will only, if you will, consolidate the negative image and Islamophobia worldwide, wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, this is a very complex situation. I think it won't, because we can really emphasize that it was like 0.01% of world Muslim population.
But it's in the news.
Yep. Ali, we are both journalists. We know how these things end up in the news, because it is, in fact, something worth to be reported if an ambassador gets killed or if an embassy gets spurred. I mean, this is for real. But on the other hand, we also, as journalists, have the capacity and the obligation to interpret these things that happen. One just a brief thing. Which is a difference between the West and the Muslim world. And as a theologian, I mean, I guess that the Muslim world and the Muslim scholars get slowly adapted to critical methods in interpreting their religion, interpreting the Holy Scriptures, as we in Christianity have had to learn over for centuries. This week, a Harvard scholar came up with a fragment that they found saying or maybe claiming that Jesus himself was married, and being a Catholic, I was told all the time that he was celibate. So, and now we have to deal with that if there's like new scientific knowledge coming along, and how we include that in our religious perception.
Asimel Defraoui, we're running out of time, but quickly, what are the lessons to be drawn from this?
One lesson is, I believe, I totally believe in freedom of speech, but I think we should be a little sensitive at times of crisis towards sentiments of other people. At the same time, I think all the mainstream Muslim population really needs to learn how to deal with provocations which will always exist. Otherwise, there will be no way out.
Nicholas Coolish?
Well, and I mean, I wish that I could say that I expect there to be more restraint in Europe or in the United States when it comes to these images, but I think that unfortunately, as it only takes 1,000 people to storm an embassy, it only takes one person to come up with an offensive drawing or an offensive story. And so I think we'll keep seeing it.
We see in these French cartoons that if you publish something provocative, it's in the times of the internet, it's addressing all of a sudden the whole world. So you may just think of selling more of your magazines, but you reach people in Benghazi, people in Kabul, and you reach also the neighbor next to your door.
So pleading for a bit more sensibility and caution. I want to thank my guests for a very spirited discussion, and I want to thank you out there for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.